an amalgam of people in mind. You know, bossy. There are certain children in my life, they've all grown up now, but when they were little, in fact, one of my nieces, I would think, she was very full of wonder and quite bossy, but didn't realise she was being bossy. And she's the elder sister, so that's a mix of it, but also I'm the older sister, so I think it's also very much in me, because I had little sisters and remember very clearly how traumatic it was when they came along. I was the one who could do everything. And they got all the attention.
It's not fair.
Not fair.
I sort of had, I remember my mum telling me a story about when she was a little girl and she got her baby brother, and she tells me the story about how terribly jealous she was of him, and so she convinced him to let her cut his hair by saying, I'll only use the blunt end of the scissors, and of course he trusted her and she cut all his hair off. So I had that instantly in mind when I read this story about this this little girl who was sort of creating this world that she's so hard done by. But nobody else really.
Well, we were talking the other day about how if David had done a different thing, and if he had done exactly what the text is saying, what the little girl is imagining, we would have had a very terrible, tragic picture book story, wouldn't we? And we probably wouldn't be allowed to publish it because it'd be so awful and dark. But the thing I love about picture books is it's a story told in 2 languages. So the illustration is doing something different than the text. So I never really worried because David was someone we were so thrilled to get, and it was such a coup to get him. So, but what we didn't know was how amazing what we got would be. So, no, I never worried. And I'm thrilled because it brought this whole other dimension. It made it much funnier, that's the thing.
I do read fairy tales and folk tales. I read them. I sometimes get Russian books or Swedish books, so I can't actually read the story, so I will read the picture, which is what you have to do anyway. But yeah, I find those sort of stories fascinating. They are the very fact that they've lasted such a long time anyway, and have been told in so many different ways, and that's what's lovely about fairy tales, is that you can reinterpret them to suit your time as well. What would I think hers would be? I don't know. She strikes me as, instantly when I read the text, I loved the language that you'd given her, because she talks about herself in this sort of very romanticised way. So that instantly started to paint pictures in my mind of fairy tales and castles and unicorns and things. In this, she has this perfect life until baby brother arrives. So I think perhaps, I don't know, maybe she sees herself a bit like, maybe she'd like Cinderella.
I'm thinking Cinderella, because Cinderella it's also melodramatic, the way she's talking about herself. The other thing I love that David did is, I don't know how, but we used to, as children, wear these tights. They're tights. Her long golden locks are actually tights. And we used to wear that as children. So it's so true. That's the thing I love.
I used to do the same. To
Did
imagine
you?
I had lovely long hair.
Oh,
I put
love
my
that.
pyjama bottoms on my head.
That's all the best
my
people.
sister's tights,
All the best people do that.
Well, when I read the text the first time, I was really struck by the language that the character uses, the voice that you had given her, the way she talks about herself in a very romanticised way. It instantly made me think fairy tales. So I started to sort of see this world of castles and unicorns and things. And then I particularly like the fashion, the style and fashion of a few designers from the 1970s, Bill Gibb, Ozzie Clarke and Sandra Rhodes. And what they were doing is they were also really using this idea of fairy tale, and they were looking at, Bill Gibb particularly was looking at medieval costume to be influenced by for his fashion. So this all sort of came together for me in this idea that, okay, let's set it in the 70s. And also it was this kind of romantic way of, I had this image of her sitting on a throne, and how she sees herself as a princess, so how could we give her a throne that isn't a throne?
Yeah.
And so that brought to mind these lovely wicker peacock, chairs, I think they're called, because of the shape of them, which also seemed very 1970s to me. And then the rug. I was looking at old pictures from Bieber and things like that from the 1970s, and it was this rich, carpeted, lovely plants inside the interiors, cheese plants and things like that, against these wicker chairs. And it all sort of brought it together to create this world within a domestic setting that felt very rich and opulent and royal, even though it's just an ordinary family home.
That's so cool.
So I started to kind of see, I wanted the patterns in the chair in what is her throne to be mirrored in the mother's dress, because when we first see her, she's sitting on her mother, and her mother is like her throne as well.
Oh,
she has her all to
great.
herself
that.
before her baby brother comes along.
That one, the next one.
Yeah. And she's got her servant here on his knees, her father, reading a story about a unicorn to her. So it's all, she's very the centre of attention. So it kind of, I don't know, all these patterns from, this is a dress, based on a dress by Sandra Rhodes that I saw in the Victoria and Albert Museum. And I'd used this dress in another illustration for a different book. And I was really still sort of struck by the patterns of it. And I loved how I could mirror these patterns, these sort of circular shapes within the chair behind, to kind of bring this whole sort of idea of this throne together.
Well, I think fun. I think play, especially in children's books, for me anyway, that's really helped me. But yes, to know that something, I think your whole goal is to make it look like it's so simple. Almost the best compliment might be, maybe this is different with illustration, but I've had people say, oh, why didn't I think of that? I could have done that. It sounds like an awful thing to say, but actually in a picture book, if it looks as if it's so simple like that, then you know that it's had probably 22 revisions or something. I mean, I think with this text, I probably had at least 22 revisions. And I never mind if I'm working with an editor that I trust, which is wonderful. We get to work with wonderful editors here at Walker. I know it's only going to make my work better. So an editor just makes you look better. So why on earth wouldn't you want to work with them?
Absolutely, yeah.
So those are my thoughts.
I think to be an illustrator, you've got to love telling stories, and you've got to love telling stories through pictures, and you've got to really find your way of seeing what the words are saying, and then seeing how your picture is going to complement those words, but also tell a little bit more of the story. So I would say that would be my advice, is to really just sort of read things and maybe sort of just try and take a little paragraph of text and draw it, and try and see then how you've drawn it. Have you been completely literal? Have you just sort of told it just what's being told in that text? Or are you telling a little bit more of the story? Are you sort of suggesting something else about the character, bringing something in from around the edge? That would be my advice, I think.